Hello, I'm Barbara Nauman. I'm the Interim Vice President for Academic Affairs here at the Community College of Rhode Island. Today, for the Conversations with the VPAA segment, I am speaking with Chief Information Officer Jim Bradley and Assistant Professor Andrew Goodman. Both gentlemen are co-chairs of the Community College of Rhode Island's Artificial Intelligence Institutional Coordinating Committee. This group is charged with developing a set of guiding principles to guide decision-making and AI considerations for the college community. Plus, there's much more that we're going to be exploring today with our conversation. I'd like to start with my question today. If you could please outline some of the current work that the committee has begun to explore.
Sure, absolutely. So the two biggest initiatives that we're currently working on, as you sort of alluded to at the beginning, is our community resolution on AI usage. That's something that we've been presenting to faculty senate, staff assembly. We've been presenting to student focus groups, and we're really just trying to get the word out. And really what that boils down to is that we're trying to create a set of shared values that we as an institution can refer back to when addressing all of the changes that AI presents to us. That's the most pressing thing that we're working on right now and really hoping to get that approved, hopefully by the end of this year.
Great.
The other big initiative and that we're also ramping up now is we're working on policies and procedures for creating ad hoc groups to address really pressing issues relating to AI. That's everything from academic integrity to how we can enhance our curriculum to make AI part of our learning outcomes.
Great. Jim, as AI becomes more mainstream, how do you see it impacting the academic institutions?
So you said it well. It becomes more mainstream because AI is already here. It's everywhere. So as it affects the schools and our institutions, I think the biggest issue is sort of the policy issue of how do we use this and what are the boundaries. The next biggest issue, I think, really is academic integrity. How do we teach students to use AI without interfering with their learning?
Yeah.
Because there's a temptation to use it the easy way. Siri, write me a document. But we really need to remind them that.
Okay. I found this on the web.
Okay.
So
So AI affects you
It's
by
always listening.
interfering with your discussions. But it's more the reminding them the purpose of the tests and the coursework is to demonstrate their mastery of the content. And having the AI write the paper for them doesn't demonstrate anything useful. And they're paying for a great education.
Right.
They're working with great faculty. And if they miss that opportunity, they've lost something.
Right.
So I think those are kind of the two biggest things I think of. Do you think that?
Sure. I mean, I think you bring up a really great point, Jim, and I think this is something that we're hearing at a lot of different levels, which is that as faculty, our biggest goal is to impart knowledge on our students. And so what AI is doing is it's sort of challenging some of our sort of long-standing methods for assessment and just how do we understand what knowledge looks like in a world where we have access to tools that do such a really good job of emulating knowledge.
Right.
And so that, I think, is a big source of anxiety. And it's interesting to note that students, I think, are also expressing some of those anxieties too. I think the other part that we're also looking at is that we've created a system that's really based on and really emphasizes this idea of taking a certain number of classes, getting a certain number of certain GPA. So there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of anxiety. And we've created this real strong drive to perform for our students.
Right.
And so how do we balance these two things of ensuring that our students are really learning while also really pushing them hard to achieve? And again, we've got to navigate that together, I think.
And I think there is kind of a third thing, and this is one of the things that comes up in IT a lot, is as our people get more and more capable, the question is how do we push the easy work down to a simpler thing that can do it so that we can take advantage of what humans can do. Because they can do things that are beyond imagination,
Right.
like invent AI.
Right.
And if we could say, we're not going to have people have to do password changes anymore, but instead we're going to take those people and have them do this more important work. And the same thing is true academically. We want to be able to have the students be challenged to do more important work, not to do something AI can do.
What's the faculty feedback on that perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think it really runs the gamut. So there's a lot of sort of historical precedents that we can look at. So I've heard faculty talk about, like, this is like when calculators replace slide rules, that, we're looking at just another technological change. But I've also heard some faculty kind of push back and say that this is something even bigger than that. Even within my own department, we actually had a really great conversation at our last meeting about, is AI just Grammarly on steroids, or is it something much more profound? And again, I think we can kind of look at it from both sort of perspectives. I think the key is that, like any piece of technology, we have to use it ethically, and we have to use it in a very informed way. Fire is great for warming your house and cooking food, but you can also burn your house down. And so I think we're in that stage of, like, how do we figure out how to use this in a way that benefits everybody?
Jim, are there misleading components about AI that's circulating within the academic arena?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who have heard the science fiction what ifs, and we're not in the point where, all of the things we've ever read in science fiction have come true. Right now we're just using large language models and things that are doing a better job of search. That doesn't even begin to cover the waterfront, but for most people, that's their touch points. And it's not building robots yet. I mean, there are, labs where they're there, but they're not. Nobody in this room is a robot. Right. And it's not going to replace so many of the human endeavors. We're going to have to elevate them over time. But even though it's here now, it's not going to change the world yesterday. Right, we're still building out what we're doing with it. We're still considering it as a tool to use, and even probably the biggest challenge with it is it's a moving target. There's not a thing called AI that isn't changing.
Right.
There's a thing called AI that is constantly changing. I think the biggest set of concerns are what does it mean to me as a human being? Do I become less relevant? And I think the answer to that is, of course not. You become more relevant because you can do more things. It frees you up. And there's not going to be all the science fiction stuff there today.
Right.
It will be here eventually, but it's not there yet.
How are you addressing that in your meetings? What's the focus? Is there kind of a strategic direction that you're taking?
Absolutely, yeah. So what we're trying to do is sort of a culture-first approach. This idea that because the changes are still coming really quickly and there are a lot of unknowns, the most effective thing we can do is really focus on building culture. And I would argue that a lot of the anxiety that we have around AI is we just haven't developed an etiquette for it yet. Yeah. We don't really know what the expectations are. And so part of what we're trying to do with our community resolution on AI usage is to sort of establish a framework, right? These are things that we're looking for people to do, and that's emphasizing on the humane, the authentic, and the informed, right? Those are those three key principles. And the idea is if we keep people at the center of it, if we try to be as authentic to ourselves and to each other as we can be, and as we try to be as informed as we can be, that those three things will help us, whether we're talking about an incoming student, a faculty member, staff member, the CIO, or even the VPAA, right? That we're all kind of trying our best to abide by these principles that hopefully we'll be making decisions that will benefit each other and the institution for a long time to come. So that's the real goal.
Tell me a little bit how you're disseminating that information across the college, the community as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing everything we can. I mean, we're doing events like this one, but we're also, we're talking to different governing bodies. So we've presented to Faculty Senate, we've presented to Staff Assembly. I yesterday just had a student focus group with a group of students on Flanagan campus. So again, we're trying every way we can to get that out. We presented even to the Chairs Committee earlier this week as well.
Can you share some of the focus group takeaways?
Sure. I mean, I think the big thing is that there's a lot of questions. I mean, I think that's probably one of the through lines for whether we're talking to staff, faculty, or students. There's a lot of questions. And again, like there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of viewpoints, right? So I had one student say, geez, I don't use AI, but I see other students using it, and I feel like they're less stressed than I am. And I'm a little, and I could tell that there was some frustration there. And it's like, yeah, like I wish we need clearer guidelines so that students who felt like they could use it can. Another quick little anecdote on this, and it was really funny because I just mentioned it to the group saying, oh yeah, we're aware that there are some students who are using AI tools to help with DSS accommodations. And one of the students who was there is like, oh yeah, I do. I use this wonderful tool and it's really great. And I said, that's fantastic. One of the questions that we're having is that like, well, one, can students use this? Because some faculty have been really anxious about that. They hear AI and they're like, whoa, 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 like we need to stop. But there's also this question of like, if this is such a great tool for students who have these accessibility issues, why aren't we using this for everybody, right? So again, it kind of becomes these questions about access, about equity, and these are questions that we're going to need to collectively figure out together. It's really inspiring. Like I think that's really fantastic that these kinds of conversations are happening, because I think there is this tendency to think of where we kind of exist within the sort of higher ed ecosystem, especially in Rhode Island, and we're actually doing really well.
Yeah. And let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you had mentioned to me at one time there's an academic consortium that's out in Rhode Island. What's happening in that consortium, and can you talk about the groups that are involved?
Sure. Yeah. So the OPC, which I don't know if we need to, the Office of Post-Secondary Commissioner, basically they convened this group. It's a working group, and it's got members of the faculty from URI, RIC, and CCRI. Jim and I, again, are both serving on that as well, which is excellent. And it's been, I think coordinating between 3 institutions has been challenging, but we have had a number of meetings. And I think our last meeting, we really kind of dug into this notion. One of the members mentioned the metaphor is like, trying to contain AI is like trying to put a fence around a hurricane. And that really, yeah, it was such a wonderful image. And so we really kind of started to dig into this. And what we're realizing is that what we're trying to do is the equivalent of giving guidelines like, we can't expect every institution to respond exactly the same way, but in much the same way that, FEMA and other organizations help people prepare for hurricanes, this group wants to sort of provide guidelines to say, hey, like every institution is going to experience AI a little differently. We're not telling you what you should and shouldn't do, but what we're saying is you better have some water, you better have a first aid kit, you better have, a radio. So it's more of a checklist to say, here are some things that you can do to help your institution be better prepared and more resilient for the changes that AI is going to be bringing.
And I would add, one of the things that's been very interesting for me as a non-academic is every conversation about AI immediately lands in the academic space, right? The most interesting issues, especially for us as people who work in education, are about the student and the classroom and how this all works. The issue of authenticity is probably the most important one from the administrative side. Nobody cares if I go to ChatGPT and draft a policy, right? But authentically, I need to note that that's also my work, or that it was used as a tool. But that comes from the academic side of the analysis. And so it's been really fun to be a participant in these discussions, because 5 seconds in, we're talking about students in classrooms.
It's funny you mentioned this. This is going back to that authenticity issue. One of the things I was sort of speculating to with the students yesterday is that one of the goals or one of the points from this community resolution is trying to be more transparent, right?
Yes.
Being more upfront about the process. And it kind of, again, the academic that I am, it got me thinking about how we have this sort of idea about authorship, like capital A, author, and that the creative process, even like the writing process, is something almost alchemical, where you have to kind of go to your study and hammer away at a typewriter, and what comes out is some sort of magic. And I'm wondering if AI is maybe an opportunity to kind of break that down and demystify it a little bit, make it a little bit more open of like, here's how I've been doing this, here's my thought process. And maybe we can actually learn from that by being more open. I'm literally going through this very thought process with my tenure application, where I'm like, okay, do I include a transcript of like, here are all the things that I've been kind of working and collaborating with my AI on, as far as like prompts and helping me to write these documents.
Well, and that idea of continuing to raise the human game.
Right.
As you use AI as a writing tool, you begin to see how much of what you write is not magic and mystery. So then you start thinking about, how do I make this, which anything can do, into something that's my own and is even better.
Does it help with writer's block?
It can.
Yeah.
So coming from the fine art world, there's this wonderful technique called the exquisite corpse. This is something the surrealists, I know it's quite the name. It was French, so
Yes,
of
of
course.
course.
But basically...
Sound even better than French,
Oh, I'm
right?
sure. I'm not even going to attempt it. But again, the idea was that they would collaborate. So they would take a piece of paper, they would fold it, and then one artist would maybe do one portion, and then the next artist would come along and sort of add to it and do their own thing. And what you would end up with is this sort of composite. So there have definitely been situations where I'm like, all right, I'm feeling really stuck here. Can you give me an example? And 9 times out of 10, what'll happen is I'll look at it and be like, that's terrible. I can do a much better job. But it's enough of kind of a kick in the pants that it helps me get over that sort of the peril of the page, right? Of like, oh, it's just, how am I going to fill this? But more often than not, I just find it to be really nice. Basically, I just say, hey, just take a look at this. What do you think? And it'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, this looks pretty strong. There's maybe a grammatical thing you could fix here, or it might be a little stronger if you change the language, here. It's more minor things, but again, it just, for a process that maybe is very anxiety causing, it's kind of helpful to have this sort of voice to be like, no, it's good. These are the strengths, and it even leads with, here are the things that are really good. So it's a nice coach, really. So that's how I've been using it, and I think because it's now recorded, I think I have to include the transcript now.
Well, but it also is the blank screen,
Right.
the blank page is no longer the only way.
Or the blinking icon. Right?
That's exactly right. You can, if you're stuck, you can turn to AI and say, I'm trying to write a paragraph about X, and it'll start you. And you can absolutely edit and make it your own. But you don't have to spend, and I've done this plenty of times, half an hour just staring at a blank screen or a
Right.
blank piece of paper back in the day.
Right.
That it's incredibly better to edit than it is, I think, sometimes to write, especially if you're not writing something that is, exquisite.
How are the faculty feeling about that whole
Sure.
I mean, has that come up in your discussions at all, or?
I mean, a little bit. Well, so, and again, like there's a whole range, right? So, we've got...
The human dynamic.
Sure. Well, I mean, literally we've got everything from, I've got a colleague who's basically been like, if it touches AI, like that's somehow tainted, and it's like, we want this to be completely...
Impure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, like that's the range. And then, there was, it came up, well, there's also come up that, faculty have been using AI to help with writing letters of recommendation. And there was sort of a collective
I heard
question of
that.
like, okay, like, are we okay with that? Like,
Yeah.
is that okay? So again, this goes back to that idea of culture and etiquette. Like, we haven't quite figured out what the expectations are, right? I mean, honestly, the whole idea about authenticity came really through Pete Bardsley, because we were part of our committee, and just talking about this idea of like how we all sort of know, or at least we all sort of have our limits, and we've kind of figured that out for ourselves. It's just, how do we externalize that and create something that we can collectively agree on? And we're not there yet. It's a dialogue, but I think, again, part of that is being open and is being transparent to be like, well, this is where I draw the line, and this is what I'm doing. And again, I think taking some of the mystery out of the creative process to be like, and in a way, I feel very fortunate as an art faculty member that so much of what we do is sort of process-based. So in other words, I'm not in the position where I'm getting a finished work at the end of the semester and it's just like, here it is, and I've never seen the student do any work up to that point. So I get to be there for every step of that process. My suspicion is that that's kind of where we're headed, is that we're going to see a bit more of that. I think right now, though, we're still in that the bargaining stage. I think we see a lot of faculty who are still like, oh, okay, well, what tool do we need to tell if this is AI generated or not?
Right.
And the consensus from everybody is basically like, I'm really sorry, but that doesn't exist, and it probably won't.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, once you've sort of reconciled that, like, there's no way to put this back in the box, if what we are responsible for as teachers is knowledge, and we now have this tool that makes knowledge a much more fluid and dynamic thing, how do we incorporate that?
Right.
And I think we're going to probably spend the rest of our lives working on that problem.
Yeah.
Well, we'll move past it and stop worrying about it at some point.
At some point, absolutely. Right, like I'd love to go and talk to, a physics faculty member who was there for the transition between slide rules and calculators.
I would feel like, if you're doing capital A author work, it should be yours. And if you're doing, administrative work and, I'm filling out a form or something, it's okay if I'm using AI. And there's the word draft. Like, I've done a lot of newsletter writing in my day, and the draft is easily edited.
Right.
But the capital A author work, when you do AI work, there's a very important skill, which is writing good prompts. So you could make an argument if you wrote a great prompt that produced good work out of AI that was better, like if he was better at it than I was, and that there is a creative path there. And is it fair for him to put a capital A author work on what comes out of the AI? If he wrote a brilliant prompt, maybe he is.
Well, and again, it goes back to this idea of collaboration. Like who has ownership, right? Because again, like in
a world where you can't tell.
Right. Well, I guess in my mind, like, thinking of my own use of AI, like it is a collaboration. Like that's how I see it, that I'm basically, it's this person that I get to say like, hey, take a look at this. What do you think? And again, like any good collaboration, it's not dictation. Like, I'm not, I don't take what AI gives me and say, okay, I guess this is it, and I'm just going to hand it in. But it's more like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a really interesting way to resolve that. Or a lot of times it'll be like, okay, this inspires something else that I then do. So again, I think opening this up, being more transparent, gives us opportunities to really kind of dig into it. But to go back to your point, I do want to mention one thing that I think is really important, which is this idea of voice and the humanness of things, because that's, I think, a really critical question. And I think this is one of the things that, again, for educators, we struggle with, which is that, you and I have decades of experience writing and communicating, so we have a voice that we've developed.
Yeah.
For a lot of our students, they maybe haven't developed a voice yet, or that idea of a voice is still kind of nebulous. We don't want AI to become their voice, but it's sort of like, how do you teach a person to develop a voice when you have this very convenient tool that can very easily supply it? That's, I think, one of those sort of fundamental challenges, is like, how do you help people develop authenticity in a world where it's so easy to emulate authenticity?
Right. Well, and this is not a new problem.
Right.
So when I went to law school, there's this tool called LexisNexis, right? First-year law students were not allowed to use it. We had to go to the library. We had to pick the book up. We had to do the research.
There were encyclopedias at one time,
Yes,
too.
there were. But that's exactly the same point, right? There are always easier ways to do work, and the faculty have always been good at staggering your use of it to the point where you have that voice. You have some level of mastery before you're allowed to use the next tool that's easier.
This conversation has been inspiring. What are you hoping to accomplish within this academic year? So we're halfway there, right?
How did that happen?
AI time.
Yeah.
Well, I think that what we want to do is we want to seed explain the conversation.
Right.
And seed sort of the core 3 principles that Andrew so eloquently talked about.
What were they again?
Sure. Humane, authentic, and informed.
Okay.
Right. So as we seed those out and say to the faculty, to the rest of the team here, this is where we are, and this is what we're thinking. Please be in the world where you're thinking about this, and you can give us good feedback and help us build the culture that assimilates AI. So it's baby steps, because we've gone from this thing that we were already using to thinking about it's the right way to use it. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be a little more, I guess, nuts and bolts and say that, well, I think this is all fresh in my head. I had to recently file the paperwork for the spring. So, I would love to see this community resolution on AI usage approved by all levels, including by the President's Council, by the end of the academic year. I think that would be excellent. I would love for us to sort of be spinning up our first we've been calling them task groups, these sort of ad hoc groups addressing key policy issues. I'd love for us to be spinning up those very first task groups by the end of the academic year. I'd love to be able to see that we've got groups meeting over the summer to really start to tackle these important issues. I think those are probably the 2 biggest goals.
Yep.
And, I guess the other big thing we haven't talked about yet was AAC and U.
Oh, yeah. Talk about that a little
Sure,
bit.
of
There's
course.
faculty members who are participating in this 1 year, right?
Correct, yes. This is the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and they're doing a year-long virtual institute. There are a group of us who are participating. And so it's been kind of nice. So being in, all these different seats, getting to kind of see how all these AI projects are all kind of working together. So one of the outcomes actually parallels really beautifully with the the community resolution on AI usage, but then we're also looking at how do we train more faculty in AI usage. The other big one is, trying to find ways to start incorporating AI literacy into our learning goals. Because again, that's a really important project. And I know that there are, Rick has an AI certificate, but I think based on our own internal conversations, the realization is AI is far too big to be sort of put in one little box.
bucket, yeah.
So we want to see AI on some level, AI literacy making its way into ideally every department, that
Yeah.
at least touching on it in some way, so that no matter where a student goes, what classes they take, that when they come out after 2 years, that they have at least some experience and can speak to it on some level. So obviously that's a big lift.
Yep.
I would love to see that we'd be on our way by the end of the academic year. What that looks like exactly, I don't know, but we got a lot on our plate, so we'll
Yeah.
see.
And I'm hoping today's conversation stimulates further conversations within the college community, and that we can get some feedback, but also have faculty, staff, administration be very reflective on some of the learning outcomes and what we're learning from this whole process as well.
That'd be wonderful.
So thank you both.
Thank you.